Right now, I am sitting in front of my screen, watching what may be the most consequential event in transatlantic history unfold in real time. Not on cable news, not in a major newspaper, not on Capitol Hill. Right here, right now. There is a clock running. 72 hours. That is the deadline NATO has issued to the United States of America to withdraw its forces from every alliance installation on European soil, or face formal expulsion from the very organization it helped establish 77 years ago. The alliance that brought the Cold War to a close, the alliance that secured peace for 3 generations, the alliance that defined what the Western world stands for. It is no longer fraying, it is finished, and the countdown to prove otherwise expires in 11 hours. Let me walk you through the 14 days that broke the Atlantic Alliance, because this did not happen overnight. This was a cascade of decisions, each one more damaging than the last, that transformed America's oldest partners into adversaries. Every single step is documented. Day 1, January 15th, 2026. President Trump sends a formal diplomatic note to the government of Denmark. The message is straightforward and severe. Sell Greenland within 10 days or face 100% tariffs on all Danish exports to the United States. But here is what received almost no coverage. The offer included zero compensation. Zero. Instead, Trump proposed canceling what he referred to as Denmark's defense debt to the United States, a debt that does not exist in any legal framework, not in a single treaty, not in any statute, not in one line of international law. Denmark is not merely a country. Denmark is a NATO ally bound by Article 5 and mutual defense, the same article invoked after September 11th, the same article that sent Danish soldiers to Afghanistan to fight and die alongside Americans. And Trump told them to surrender an autonomous territory or be taxed into submission. That was day 1. Day 4, January 18th, brought what can only be described as the insult heard around the world. During a Fox Business interview, Trump claimed that NATO allies stayed a little back and a little off the front lines during the war in Afghanistan, while American troops did the real fighting. That statement landed like an explosive in London, Berlin, Ottawa, and Warsaw, because every single one of those governments buried soldiers in that war. Soldiers who died on the same mountains, in the same valleys, and in the same firefights as Americans. But the statement itself was not the worst part. That same day, Trump ordered a 40% cut to the American military budget allocated for Ramstein Air Base in Germany, the largest United States military installation outside of American territory. 120 personnel were given 30 days to withdraw. There was no consultation with Berlin, no warning to NATO command, just an executive order signed in the afternoon and transmitted before dinner. Day 7, January 21st, is where things became genuinely dangerous. The Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs circulated a classified memorandum to all 27 European Union member states. The subject line referenced the activation of Article 42.7, the Mutual Defense Clause of the Treaty of Lisbon, which carries the same collective defense guarantee as NATO's Article 5, except it does not require American participation. Poland was formally proposing that Europe prepare to defend itself without the United States. For the first time since 1949, a European democracy was circulating documents that treated American protection as a liability rather than an asset. Poland, the country that depends most heavily on American deterrence against Russia, was the one drafting the exit plan. Day 10, January 24th, brought the quiet betrayal. Prime Minister Keir Starmer met privately with French President Emmanuel Macron. What happened in that room did not stay secret. The Guardian published a leaked transcript within 48 hours. Starmer made an offer that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. If the United States moved forward with expelling Denmark from NATO over Greenland, the United Kingdom would withdraw from the Five Eyes intelligence sharing agreement, the surveillance and intelligence alliance between the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand that has existed since the end of World War II. In exchange, Britain committed to joining what Macron was calling the European Intelligence Union, sharing classified signals intelligence with Brussels instead of with Langley. The Central Intelligence Agency was losing its most important partner because of a territorial dispute over an island. Day 14, January 28, 10 p.m. Brussels time. The emergency session of the North Atlantic Council convened. 30 member states were represented. 29 delegations were present in the chamber. The United States was not invited. According to the official minutes transmitted to a source at NATO headquarters in Brussels, 28 nations voted in favor of a resolution titled Suspension of United States Voting Rights Pending Compliance Review. Only 2 nations voted against it, Turkey and Hungary. The legal basis was Article 13 of the North Atlantic Treaty, a provision that has never been invoked in 77 years of alliance history. The formal charge against the United States was that President Trump's public threat of military force against Denmark, a treaty ally, constituted a material breach of Article 1's foundational commitment to settling international disputes by peaceful means. It was the first time a founding member of NATO had been charged with violating the treaty's core principles. At 3:14 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte placed a phone call to the Pentagon. The message was direct. Withdraw American forces from all NATO installations on European soil within 72 hours, or face formal expulsion from the alliance. This was not a negotiation, it was a notification. You might be thinking that this simply cannot happen. The United States has nuclear weapons. There are 100,000 American troops in Europe. The United States has the world's largest economy. No one would dare attempt an expulsion. That assumption is wrong. This is a 4-stage process that is already in motion. Stage 1 is legal pretext, and it is already complete. The European legal team at NATO headquarters has constructed a case they believe is airtight. Trump's public threat to use military force against Greenland violates Article 1's commitment to peaceful dispute resolution. The unilateral 40% budget cut at Ramstein Air Base violates Article 3's requirement that member states consult on matters affecting collective defense. Legal scholars have argued that a United States attempt to seize Greenland militarily would constitute an attack on Denmark, which under Article 5 would simultaneously be an attack on every NATO member. The legal foundation is firmly in place. Stage 2 is diplomatic isolation, and it is happening right now. The Munich Security Conference, the most important annual gathering of transatlantic defense ministers, convened today. For the first time since 1963, the United States was not invited to the core sessions. On February 3rd, European Union defense ministers held a closed-door session in Brussels with one agenda item: post-NATO security architecture. On February 5th, a trilateral summit between the United Kingdom, France, and Germany took place, focused on what participants described as the European nuclear umbrella, meaning Europe is actively discussing how to replace the American nuclear guarantee that has protected the continent since 1949. Stage 3 is economic strangulation, and every American needs to pay close attention to what this involves. The European Union has prepared a sanctions package called Operation Independence. It has been drafted, reviewed by legal counsel, and is ready to deploy the moment the 72-hour deadline expires. The package contains 100% tariffs on all American technology exports to the European Union, covering semiconductors, software, and cloud computing. It includes a prohibition on European banks extending credit to American corporations operating within EU jurisdiction. And then there is what can only be described as the most extreme option: freezing $2.3 trillion in American assets held within the European financial system. If the EU activates this package, the dollar would not simply weaken, it would collapse. American inflation would spike to levels not witnessed since the Weimar Republic. This would not be a recession, it would be economic devastation on a scale not seen since 1929, and it would be entirely self-inflicted. Stage 4 is military expulsion, and this is the scenario that is keeping Pentagon officials awake at night. Under Article 13, a suspended member state loses the legal protections that come with alliance membership. American military installations on European soil would no longer be protected by treaty. Host nations would gain the legal right to reclaim sovereignty over those bases. According to a document leaked from the German Ministry of Defense 2 days ago, the operation already has a name: Operation Charlemagne. Germany would nationalize Ramstein Air Base and give 35,000 American service members 90 days to vacate. Turkey would close Incirlik Air Base, which currently houses American nuclear weapons. Poland would seize $4 billion in NATO pre-positioned equipment stockpiles located on Polish soil. European military police units have already been quietly repositioned near American installations over the past 2 weeks. If the deadline expires without compliance, the eviction begins immediately. Now, there is something critical that no one else is connecting right now. Losing the bases is not the real story. Losing the alliance is not the real story. The real story is what happens the day after America is expelled from NATO, because Beijing has been watching every one of these 14 days and calculating accordingly. The United States currently maintains what military strategists call a two-theater force, meaning the capability to fight simultaneously in Europe and in Asia. That capability depends on forward-deployed forces in both regions. If NATO collapses and access to European bases is lost, an impossible choice emerges: Europe or Asia. Both cannot be managed at once. If America is expelled from NATO, 60% of the United States Navy currently stationed in the Atlantic and Mediterranean would need to redeploy to the Pacific to maintain credible deterrence against China. That redeployment takes months, and during those months the United States would be strategically exposed in both theaters simultaneously. According to a study produced by the RAND Corporation and commissioned by the Department of Defense, if NATO collapses, the United States would not have sufficient naval and air assets to defend Taiwan from a Chinese military operation. The report estimates that China's window to act would move from 2030 to 2027, 3 years earlier than every previous assessment. There is more. The European Union and India trade agreement signed 6 days ago includes a clause that almost no one has analyzed. Article 12 states that signatories remain neutral in conflicts not directly affecting European territory. That word, neutral, is critical. If China moves on Taiwan and the United States calls on allies for support, the European Union would decline, citing neutrality. Japan and South Korea, whose security frameworks depend on the American umbrella, would be thrown into panic. Beijing understands that the collapse of NATO creates a window of 6 to 8 months where America is paralyzed, unable to protect Europe, unable to fully commit to Asia, and unable to rely on partners who have concluded that neutrality is safer than solidarity. There is one final element that changes everything. Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Turkey currently host approximately 150 American tactical nuclear weapons under a NATO arrangement known as nuclear sharing. If the United States is expelled, those warheads must immediately leave European soil. But Europe would then have no deterrent of its own, since only France and the United Kingdom possess independent nuclear arsenals, and Britain has already signaled that its loyalties may be shifting toward Brussels. According to a memo leaked from the Élysée Palace dated January 26th, President Macron proposed a French nuclear umbrella for all EU member states, but with a stark condition: Germany, Italy, and others must fund 100% of France's nuclear weapons program going forward at an estimated cost of 120 billion euros annually. Germany's response, delivered through back channels, was a flat refusal. Chancellor Scholz reportedly called it fiscal blackmail. That refusal creates a security vacuum, and there is only one country both willing and positioned to exploit that gap: Russia. American expelled, NATO dissolved, European nuclear umbrella refused, Eastern Europe left exposed, and Moscow, which has been waiting for precisely this moment, begins probing Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, without American forces, without Article 5, and without a credible deterrent in place. This is not speculation. This is the war game scenario NATO has been running in classified sessions for the past 6 months, and the results of those simulations are not reassuring. The White House is aware of all of this. They have reviewed the numbers and seen the projections, and their response may be the most alarming element of this entire crisis, because the president has 3 options in front of him, and every single one leads toward catastrophe. The first option, which sources inside Mar-a-Lago are describing as the preemptive withdrawal strategy, involves Trump pulling the United States from NATO before expulsion can occur. The logic, however distorted it may sound, centers on controlling the narrative. He would announce that America is leaving because Europe refuses to pay its fair share, and frame it as a show of strength rather than defeat. The executive order is reportedly already drafted, but if he signs it, the stock market collapses 40% within 72 hours. The dollar loses half its value as global capital flees American assets, and inflation spikes to levels never seen during peacetime. The second option involves economic warfare through tariff retaliation and asset freezes aimed at forcing European reconciliation. But it carries a fatal flaw. It only works if America has allies willing to join the sanctions regime. China, India, and Southeast Asian nations have all signed trade agreements with the European Union in the past 2 weeks. They are not siding with Washington. American exporters would lose access to the world's largest consumer market, while European trade simply redirects to Asia. The third option involves instructing the 100,000 American troops currently stationed in Europe not to withdraw at all, declaring U.S. military bases on European soil as sovereign American territory, and threatening that any attempt to seize them would constitute an act of war. Europe's contingency plan in response has already been circulated among EU defense ministers. If American forces refuse to leave, Germany and Poland would surround the bases with their own military units and cut off electricity, water, and food supplies, creating a humanitarian crisis designed to force Washington to back down. But the nightmare scenario is what happens if a single shot is fired at a base perimeter. At that point, American and European troops are in direct conflict. NATO would not simply collapse, it would end in bloodshed. A former National Security Council official with direct knowledge of conversations inside the White House confirmed 1 hour ago that Trump does not believe any of this is real. He believes Europe is bluffing. He believes that when the deadline arrives, Brussels will extend negotiations and back down because no one would actually dare expel the United States. But the documentation tells a different story. This vote was 28-2. European governments have spent 6 months preparing for this exact moment. They have built the financial, diplomatic, and military infrastructure to function without America. They are not acting out of emotion. This is strategic calculation. And there is one final development that changes the entire equation. The Joint Chiefs of Staff sent a classified memorandum to President Trump at 9 p.m. last night with a blunt message: do not retaliate. The military leadership is telling its commander-in-chief that economic retaliation would collapse the American economy, that military confrontation would trigger a NATO civil war, and that preemptive withdrawal would destroy American credibility for a generation. According to a source inside the Pentagon, Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, personally called Mark Rutte in Brussels 2 days ago in a conversation that lasted 11 minutes. Milley's message was simple: give the United States 90 days to handle this internally. The implication is unmistakable. The American military is weighing the use of the 25th Amendment. 4 members of the cabinet have already held private discussions about declaring the president unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. There is no precedent for this, but the conversations are taking place right now. 14 days ago, this crisis began with a dismissive comment about Afghanistan. It escalated into extortion over Greenland. It accelerated through unauthorized budget cuts and unilateral threats. And tonight, 11 hours before the deadline, we are staring at the simultaneous potential collapse of the Atlantic Alliance, the possible removal of an American president, and a global power vacuum that China, Russia, and authoritarian governments around the world are prepared to fill without hesitation. The world that people wake up to tomorrow morning may be fundamentally different from the one they went to sleep in last night.